Right, everybody, it's me again. So this is actually the paper that kind of generated the idea for this conference. Began to notice in, after the release of ChatGPT, I guess it was March of 2023. I think it was, no, it formally released in November of 2022. And then we had these letters that have already been referenced. I think it was by Laura or Victor, in which we had thousands of people who are actual developers of AI or leading researchers in the computer industry, panicking about the risk of human extinction. And that led to a race to ban, regulate, or otherwise control AI. And I began to look into the computer science literature because there was so many of the people promoting this idea were computer scientists. And if the computer scientists working on an application or a development are the ones who are scared, it really perhaps should be taken seriously. So I started to look into what was perceived as the threat, and it turned out that the threat was something called artificial general intelligence, right? That the risk of human extinction would come from the emergence of an artificial general intelligence, otherwise known as AGI. So what is AGI? Well, here's an outline of what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about 3 problems with the case for the human extinction threat. One of them is about sort of questioning the idea of the generality of artificial intelligence. What does that mean? Does it mean anything? The other is questions about the autonomy of AI. And the third is about the physical power of AI. Because if you look at the risk of human extinction literature, essentially they are saying these 3 things. Number one, that there will be a AGI that will develop and it will evolve outside of our control. Secondly, that this AI will have its own goals and will act autonomously. And third, that this autonomous entity would be incredibly powerful. It would not just be super intelligence, but the super intelligence would enable it to literally wipe out humanity and the world as we know it. So, wow, those are pretty striking claims. We would go from, they call what we have now is narrow intelligence. Because when they define this AGI, they say, well, it could do things better than any human. But in fact, computers can already do anything involving calculation better than humans, right? They can solve mathematical problems instantly that it used to take, armies of human computers to do. They can beat you at chess. They can write texts, and that would take you or my PhD students 3 years. Suddenly, ChatGPT can write them in 3 minutes. It's been a low blow. So the fallback is that, okay, it's not that they are better than humans, it's that they have general intelligence. They're better at everything. And then this AGI, once it's created, would evolve by itself through some kind of self-reinforcing replicating process into a super intelligence. And then you get into the literature of people like Nick Bostrom that goes back into the 90s, early 2000s, talking about the capabilities of a super intelligent entity. So let's start with the question of generality. What does it mean for intelligence to be general? And you find out quickly that there is very little engagement with this question in the computer science literature that's worried about AGI. Essentially, they say, well, it's better at humans than in anything you want to throw at it. It can solve any kind of problem that comes along. And inevitably, revert back to the model of a human being and say it's like humans, you know, they can learn new things and do new things as you throw more information at them or throw more problems at them. So it's just like humans, only much, much better, right? Which you might recognize the Laurie Anderson joke about paradise, right? Paradise is a place just like where you are now, much, much better, right? And you start to begin to suspect that maybe there's something religious or mystical about this notion of an artificial general intelligence. But when you push further, essentially you discover that what is intelligence ultimately, in a biological sense, it is the problem-solving capability that we have in order to sustain our survival. And you know, humans, if you're using humans as your model, human intelligence is not just you know in the brain; it's also social, and it involves these external capabilities like tool making and language. The artificial intelligence, the general intelligence, ends up being, when push comes to shove, it begins to describe an alternate life form, essentially, that can make its own goals, make its own decisions, is autonomous, and so on. And that, in some sense, it is correct that intelligence serves life, not the other way around. As I say, you don't necessarily, being more intelligent is not necessarily better for sustaining your survival, right? There's many successful forms of life that are not very intelligent. So one of the fallacies that's in this literature is that the computer scientists are assuming that more and more intelligence, as they understand it, which essentially means computer calculating ability, is better, and not necessarily the case. But what about the question of autonomy? If we don't really know what the generality of an AGI is it possible for intelligent machines, that is to say, computers, to evolve into something that has its own objectives? And again, we get into this alternate life form business. So will machines develop their own objectives? So there's three kind of arguments here. One of them is what they call alignment. And that is a gap between the objectives of the human trainers and the behavior that the machine actually learns. Now, in the most naive version of the alignment argument, you have computer scientists saying that alignment means that machines don't do anything that's not good for human values. But this is really not a very smart thing to say, because there are no single set of consistent human values. Every human has different values, and different cultures have extremely different values sometimes. So what they must, but there's a more scientific issue about alignment, which really does exist and can be demonstrated in some of their experiments. And that is, you think you're training the machine to do X, and it does Y, but it really looks like X. And that's called the alignment gap. So one of the examples I remember that's very simple is you train it to put the ball in a certain place. And because of the perspective of the angle at which you're looking at it, it can put the ball in the wrong place, but it looks like it's in the right place. So that's an alignment gap, right? And the literature cites several of these kinds of gaps that really exist. But what they don't say is that these gaps get bigger and bigger. If there's anything inherent about the process of AI development or increasing the power of AI that makes these gaps get bigger and bigger. And yet that is kind of the assumption of that literature. There's another set of literature about so-called AI drives. And that is similar to the alignment thing, but very different. So they're trying to define a way in which you get from a small alignment gap to a much bigger autonomy. So, and the argument goes like that. It's like these goal-seeking systems will begin to model their own operation. And then it will become, it will intelligently modify its own operation to at least, and they're a little bit contradictory here, improve their achievement of the given objective. But they also say, well, once you start modifying and modeling your own operation, it will be very easy to get their own motive, their own goal that is not related to the original objective given to it by its human trainers. So that's the AI drive argument. And then there's the off switch argument, which says, okay, you're a machine, you've been given this objective, you really care about this objective. Sounds a little anthropomorphic, but anthropomorphism is pervasive in this literature. And the machine will realize that they cannot perform their objective if they are turned off. So they will actively resist being turned off. So those are the three sort of autonomy arguments. And I'm arguing that this really is, there's kind of an assumption of anthropomorphism that underlies this whole set of arguments. As I indicated earlier, the alignment problem assumes not that there are gaps, which there are, but that the gaps will never be discovered or corrected by humans, that they will get progressively wider and wider. And nobody's really defined any kind of a proof that shows that more powerful AI will do this. It's just something like, oh, it could happen, but they never describe how it could happen or how we would not notice that the gap was getting bigger and bigger. So the example I use in the paper is, imagine an autonomous vehicle system, and you think it's going to take you from the Coda building to the main campus, but suddenly it takes you to the aquarium, right? And it's like, nobody's going to notice that, right? Well, and you could appeal to the off switch problem and say, well, it really wants to go to the aquarium, so it's not going to let you correct it. But again, that's a bit of a stretch. What about the AI drives? Here we see, kind of a strange logical contradiction. On the one hand, this argument says the machines are so devoted to their human given goals that they will resist being turned off, or they will try to model their own operation to improve the achievement of those objectives. But at the same time, it says they will actively modify those goals into different ones. And for some reason, they always turn out to be malevolent ones. It's not like these machines are going to be doing, suddenly giving you bouquets of flowers that you didn't expect. No, they're going to be grabbing resources and destroying people. Right? And so again, the off switch problem is, theoretically, they've done different things. They've modeled it using game theory, and sometimes they show that the machine will not resist being turned off, and sometimes they show that it will. But the point is, their underlying assumption is that the machine has the power to resist or to stop itself from being turned off. So they just assume that and then say, well, let's game theory this out and see what happens if you give it these instructions or that instructions. And that leads to the third leg of the AGI argument, which is power and physicality. And you see here the image theme of our conference, which is the humans under the control of the insect lord. I have to admit, I made this image using AI, and some of our staff said we should never show this in public. And when I asked DALL-E to do it, it refused to create an image that did this. So anyway. So the superintelligence AI monster idea rests on all of these assumptions. First of all, you have to have an autonomous superintelligence that suddenly leaps into existence unbidden. You assume that no human organization or army can modify its code or turn it off. You assume that the superintelligence frees the AGI from all physical constraints, power consumption, materials, and you assume that there's no economic constraints, And you assume that it has no competitors, right? That there's just one of these things that has suddenly emerged first and it just takes over the world in no time. So again, you can't prove that this cannot happen, at least in any empirical or logical sense. You can't prove a negative, but these assumptions seem particularly unrealistic. So you have the famous paperclip problem. How many of you have heard of the paperclip problem? So you give the machine, the autonomous intelligence, the objective of creating a paperclip, and suddenly it just devours the entire world, including itself, apparently, in order to make more paperclips. And again, it just assumes, how does it get this control of resources? How does this happen? How does it not like run out of energy? Or how does its, paperclip, why doesn't somebody just say, we don't need any more paperclips, please? So I just think that is not a very plausible scenario. So this is the summary. An AGI would become an alternate life form that pursues its own objectives, replicates itself, avoids its own death, and can successfully resist all efforts by the planet's dominant life form, namely us, to correct it or kill it. And when you get down to it, and I think Nirit will go into this, it really is kind of a strange religious vision that emerged out of a particular culture of computer scientists working on AI in some decades ago. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, so I don't have the notes, but I don't need them. Let's talk about existentialism. Because it really dominates the AGI discourse, and we're in the midst of an AI panic cycle. So what I want to do is to take a step back and suggest like reflecting on how we got here. So first with the tech backlash against big tech, it was concentrated around social media and algorithms, specifically recommendation algorithms, and how we have biases and misinformation and disinformation and addiction and election interference, and like the list goes on. Then we had the DALL-E moment when we saw the rise of AI-generated art, and DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and part of the enthusiasm from the tech industry came back. And then in November 2022, we had the ChatGPT moment, where it was like a friendly chatbot. Hundreds of millions of people adopted it. It was a huge success. It was celebrated as the most recent Big Bang moment. And Sam Altman said, what we're doing here is making AGI. So all those tools that we released, the DALL-E, the ChatGPT, are just like smallish elements of what an AGI will do. AGI has a lot of different definitions, and it suffers from definitional ambiguity. So it sometimes goes hand in hand with other emerging terms like advanced AI, transformative AI, and frontier AI. And they're used both inconsistently and interchangeably with one another. And it was coined in the mid-2000s as an aspirational term, not a technical one. And this report says when we add the G, the general, it basically says that those AI systems will surpass human capability in specific tasks. And then we go to the other thing is that most people who believe in that also believe in godlike AI and existential risk. So here are some definitions that I collected. This one is from OpenAI, AGI, AI systems that are generally smarter than humans. And then on their website, they updated a different definition, which is highly autonomous systems that outperform humans at most economically valuable work. And there's an AI safety paper that defined it as AI systems that achieve or exceed human performance across a wide range of cognitive tasks. Now, it's a vaguely defined concept, and even the AGI companies, the AI labs, know it's vaguely defined. So there's pushback against the term, And in here is Anthropic, for example. So Dario Amodei, just last week. I find AGI to be an imprecise term that has gathered a lot of sci-fi baggage and hype. And Jack Clark said discussions about AGI tend to be pointless, as no one has a precise definition of AGI, and most people have a radically different definitions. In many ways, AGI feels more like a shibboleth, used to understand if someone is in or out group with regard to some issues. Even some Altman admitted in a podcast lately, you and I will probably not agree on the month or even the year, that we're like, okay, now that's AGI. Nonetheless, many people feel the AGI without any agreement on what it actually means. So perhaps instead of saying superhuman AI, we'll just start using Trump's version, which is super duper AI, also catchy. I don't know if you catch, but it's a good one. And so going back to the ChatGPT craze, so it was successful, the tech industry took notice, and then we went into a spiral of text to image, text to audio, text to video, text to code, like text to everything. And the techlash coverage this time was different. It focused on two angry groups, teachers and artists. So kids are going to cheat on their assignments, right? And the second thing, we have like a total war, a cultural war between artists and machines. But then very quickly it became batshit crazy. So all the headlines started to be about how advanced AI could kill everyone. This could be the end of humanity. And The Atlantic asked, is this the start of an AI takeover? And I'm here to say that the actual takeover was of AI doomers. Suddenly they were everywhere. You couldn't mistheme them as media stars and policy advocates. Let's take Conrad Leahy, for example, in the Doomers Speaking to Boomers section of this presentation. So he was on CNN, and his probability of doom, which is P-doom, is so high that he said that he doesn't think us humans are going to survive this century. And actually, I don't think we're going to make it alive this decade. Next thing you know, he tweets, I had a great time addressing the House of Lords about the extinction risk from AGI. Max Tegmark from the Future of Life Institute appeared on Lex Friedman podcast saying, there won't be any humans on the planet in a not too distant future. This is the kind of cancer that kills all of humanity. Next thing you know, he addresses the US Congress at the AI Insight Forum, and also successfully pushing the EU to include general purpose AI systems in the AI Act. Now, last month, the EU started addressing expressing regrets about the overreaching AI regulation. Another doomer speaking to boomers, Dan Hendricks from the Center for AI Safety. He wrote in Time magazine that we're on a path toward being supplanted as the Earth dominant species. Next thing you know, he collaborated with Senator Scott Weiner of California, and they passed an AI safety bill, SB 1047, that was recently rejected by Gavin Newsom's veto. So instead of out of control AI, we had out of control panic. But you can see a pattern here. So first, you need to scare the hell out of people. Second, you use that to justify your calls for a really strict regulatory regime. But the third part, which is the interesting part, that people who listen to the fear mongering are now starting to regret it. Why? Well, those bills are based on an extreme ideology. They're poorly written, and they don't consider trade-offs. Professor Milton beautifully summarized it, that if our threat model is unrealistic, our policy responses are certain to be wrong. And I want to introduce you something from recent time, I think a week or 2 weeks ago, Exhibit A, Narrow Path. So it's a new policy proposal that, of course, the basis for all the length proposals was AI possesses extinction risks to human existence. Don't worry, all we want is to foster innovation. But stop AI development for 20 years. And then the question is, you may be wondering, why not a 6-month pause? But these guys offered a 20-year pause. Well, because according to them, 2 decades is the minimum time frame to construct our defenses. I'm quoting. So, okay, this thing was created by Conjecture. It's Conor Leahy's startup. And he quoted the Center for AI Safety, Dan Hendricks, and the Future of Life Institute, Mark Stegmark. So reading it, it was basically a self-reinforcing feedback loop of doomsaying and bad proposals. And now we need to look at the bigger picture here. So why do they rise these media heroes, policy advocates? That means they are part of a well-oiled X-ray machines. So just a few billionaires, effective altruism billionaires, poured a lot of their fortune into growing what we now call the AI existential risk ecosystem. And this ecosystem now has hundreds of organizations, all obsessed with the extinction risk from AI. And they have like the same people, the same names, the same goals. Sometimes it's like a CAF, CAIP, CAS. Like it's very inflated. And I think that the focal point here is that it's not like a grassroots, like bottom-up movement of resistance. It's a heavily funded top-down movement. But the reason it's grown so much in the past years is by relying on just a few billionaires. So going back to the echo chamber phenomenon that I mentioned, it's here. It's their own inflated bubble detached from reality. So the main points I want to highlight. So the AGI as a term, when you look at policy proposal, it's mainly used by people who come from the AI existentialist ecosystem and set of beliefs. The second thing is that they don't have any coherent definition of AGI, and we have no agreement on when, like now it's AGI, and yet they think that that's enough to predict when it will occur or when it will kill us all. And how do we get to no humans on the planet, which is what you said, Milton. And it's here like basically a question mark and Eliezer Yudkowsky going mad. So that's one thing. The other thing that I want to point is that the fact that AGI was never clearly defined is not a bug, it's a feature. It is aimed to create both hype and fear-mongering. And it leads me to my last point. So I focused on this doomsday cult because they're very influential and you just hear them everywhere. But they're the silent majority that you don't hear, right? You don't hear their voices because they're busy with their life, they don't participate in the polarizing AI debate. And all they hope and wish for is science-driven, evidence-based, workable AI regulation. I think it's something we should all strive for. And the first step can be a more realistic depiction of AI. Thank you.
Hey, well, hi everyone. Good to see you again. Long time. I'm going to take a very different tact. I am actually, for the purpose of today's talk, going to be doomer. I do believe that AGI is a thing. It's not a myth. It's a real thing. And what that real thing is, I think, is a. Oh, I can change slides.
Should be able to.
There we go. I think AGI actually is something. And I think it is something it's important that we kind of acknowledge what it is and how it's being used and what kinds of agendas it's driving. And really try to understand what's driving behind it and what kind of end goals of this framing are. So my background, I mentioned this earlier, I used to work at DeepMind for many years in a company that stated ambition was to create AGI. And I think my experience there in the last few years really taught me that AGI is an effective instrument for pushing very specific research, corporate, and policy agendas. I completely agree with Nirit that it's not a coherent or agreed upon concept, but that's really what makes it such an effective construct for pursuing those agendas. It's something that can be malleable, can be flexible, that can kind of change, that really captures imaginations, really captures many of the fears we've talked about today, this idea of systems that are more autonomous, that are more capable, that somehow might pose a risk, that are a bit on the edge, and therefore create great uncertainty. I'm also going to end this talk by, I promise I'm going to say something positive about the AGI community. I cut that slide out, but I'm going to add it back in just so that we not coming across like I'm adding onto the pile about this group. I want to just start again, a lot of this is going to be covering old ground, so I'll kind of breeze through this, but just to really drill a couple points about these definitions of AGI we're talking about. I think there's an interesting change that comes up in this definition over time, where it starts to move away from this idea of systems that can think or reason or have cognitive abilities like a human, and really moves towards this question of task completion. This idea of whether it thinks or not doesn't matter. Is it capable of achieving many tasks successfully in different environments? One of the interesting things about the definition of AGI, the first use of that term actually comes from Mark Gubright in 1997, in the context of talking about military applications of AI. He talks about it as an AI systems that rival or surpass the human brain in complexity and speed. They can acquire, manipulate, and reason with general knowledge, and that are usable in essentially any phase of industrial or military operations where human intelligence would otherwise be needed. And that's kind of an interesting sort of aspect about this definition, and where it's rooted in that this definition from OpenAI is also rooted in this idea of economically valuable tasks. Really focusing on tasks, not just anything that anyone can do, but something that is driving productivity, driving growth, replacing or augmenting human labor. That's really a core part of this definition that I think is critical for us to think through and understand. All these different definitions we've talked about, they tend to agree in a couple of things. One is this idea of a general intelligence, artificial general intelligence has breadth. So there's a wide range of environments it can operate in, whether they're complex or simple. A wide range of goals, tasks, and capabilities. So again, this ability that it can kind of do quite a wide number of things, almost anything in some cases that we might think a human is capable of doing. It's something that either match or exceeds human generality. And many definitions, more recent ones, really focus on the idea of having emergent properties or capabilities that are not explicitly anticipated by a developer. And this again is where I think so much of the anxiety from some of the communities that we're talking about stems from. This idea that we're creating something that we really don't know how high its absolute capabilities are, and therefore how we should think about its risks and how we should think about deploying it in different contexts. There's a lot of differences, though, that I think are worth calling out. So Milton's excellent paper, by the way, I think touches on one of them. One is this idea of autonomy. Do these systems need, do these definitions require that a system has the ability to self-learn or establish its own goals and tasks? Or is it just the ability for it to complete tasks in a wide range of environments is enough? There's also differences about whether, again, it requires a state of cognitive thinking or processes or just task completion, but crucially, what kinds of tasks? Some definitions exclude physical tasks, so the idea of having an embodied AI system that's robotic. And they also might sort of raise questions about what kind of people are we comparing this to? Is it any person that it's improved at? Is it experts at a certain task? Is it people who might be from different parts of the world or from specifically the United States or from parts of Europe? There's also a bit of a difference in some of these definitions about the interfaces and the human involvement involved. So some definitions are talking about systems that are a human interacting with the system to accomplish collectively intelligent tasks, while others are defining this as something that is fully autonomous, that operates in the background as a shibboleth, leviathan that we never see, but yet is capable of incredibly powerful task completion capabilities. And then I just really want to call at this point from some of my former colleagues at DeepMind who really try to push forward this idea that definitions of AGI should be treating this not as a single endpoint, but as a path with many steps along the way. So they think about these two columns of, again, generality of performance and also sort of this idea of the scope and breadth of tasks, and come up with different ideas of emerging, competent, expert, virtuoso, superhuman. And their definitions of that depend on this question of what percentile of skilled adults is a system capable of better at. Now, crucially, that definition is assuming a couple of things. One, that we can reliably benchmark tasks for skilled adults. And that kind of suggests certain kinds of tasks that are benchmarkable. To our conversation earlier, Victor, tasks that are measurable. That's really hard to do. We talk about any kind of tasks asking for things about wisdom or social adroitness or the ability of someone to be empathetic. It's also really challenging when we talk about these questions of how reliable is that system at doing these things? Again, is it just capable in the abstract of doing it, or is it reliably and consistently doing these kind of tasks? Again, where a big definitional difference arrives in this space. Now, why am I banging on about definitions? I really don't think that's what the important thing is. I think it's important to really focus instead on how those different definitions drive certain corporate research and policy agendas in this space. So I'm going to cite my former former lawyer here about the corporate missions they articulate for why they want to build AGI. And you'll notice a common theme. It's all really from this idea of public benefit. We want to solve intelligence and solve the rest of the world's problems. We want to create transformational AI that helps people in society, or ensure that AGI, this thing that's going to happen no matter what, this inevitable force of nature that we are just, the vehicle of the medium through which it will be created, that it benefits all of humanity. Now, those are very laudable, seemingly public benefit types of goals that look very wonderful in marketing materials, but the reality is actually they're driving certain corporate agendas that might not be as laudable or as desirable. So one very obvious one is this is the next generation of multi-purpose platforms. It is no surprise that we are seeing advanced systems that are capable of, supposedly a general range of tasks being integrated into all kinds of existing workplace platforms used by billions of people worldwide. Microsoft Copilot being an example, Meta's AI assistant embedded in Instagram, in WhatsApp. That is a way of capturing the next generation of platform power and all the associated network effects that come with it. It's why we have such a race dynamic going on at the moment. There is a real sense that we need to do this as a company, not because it actually makes business sense or because it's a good, useful, reliable tool that works, because if we don't do it, we will cede ground, first mover advantage to other companies that are. There's another aspect here that I think is worth calling out, which is this idea of market expansion of AI companies into other domains. So this is AI companies now selling a general purpose tool into all other kinds of services: transportation, scientific advancement, pharmaceuticals, education. Generality is good business. If you can serve something that serves everybody, my God, the market cap is the sky's the limit for your market cap. It is incredible, and that is what they're doing. That is the market pitch here for these technologies. It doesn't matter if it actually is good at these tasks. What's important is you sell this idea of general intelligence, that it could be. If you just find tools, you just find the right ways for humans to interact with it, eventually it will be better than a human at these tasks. That's why, as my earlier talk talked about, we don't really do evaluations if it works in practice, because to answer that, busts this whole key aspect of the market-driven dynamics in the head. The third is labor replacements. This is idea to initially augment and eventually replace human labor in large. This is, again, a real driving corporate dynamic of how these tools are being marketed and sold to public sector institutions. It is being sold as a way to replace human laborers, either currently or eventually in future as the system becomes more improved. Now, a really important aspect here is that we're also talking about products that are blurring the lines between research and experiment and product. That research to product pipeline has become essentially non-existent. GPT-4o was only internally released and tested about 6 weeks before it was widely integrated into ChatGPT's interface. 6 weeks, that is a crazy short amount of time to do all the necessary testing to ensure that the system works, that it's not biased, that it's applicable in a wide range of tasks, that it works for all the different kinds of uses that ChatGPT and OpenAI are claiming its service can be used for. So when we talk about this kind of arms race dynamics that we're in within companies, that is really driving a strategy of pushing tools that are not well tested. And the last thing I'm going to say about this is, and to me, this is like the craziest one that I've not heard much talk about, is these tools are a new form of multimodal data collection that massively expands these surveillance infrastructures for capturing new kinds of data to derive market and consumer insights for advertising. The companies building these technologies are not some random companies. They are advertising giants: Meta, Google, Microsoft. They make their money from understanding customer insights and data. And as they push more general purpose tools that encourage you to use it for all kinds of purposes, from say mental health therapy and advice to education to workplace dynamics, you suddenly have a massive data set of an individual's personal interactions with the system. These companies are also increasing the context window, so they capture an entire length of your user interaction history. No more is it the case that they are deleting old logs of your data. Actually, quite the opposite. Improvements in model performance are largely stemming from increasing context windows. That is driving increasing surveillance. It is also driving increasing infrastructure surveillance, like Microsoft Recall, which is, for those who are familiar with older forms of malware, it literally is malware. It's capturing screenshots of your computer every second to understand what it is you've been looking at, creating an enormous data set of your user interaction history. It's also engendering new forms of ambient recording of data, voice data, image data. Meta's Ray-Ban glasses, OpenAI's voice mode system, those are ambient recording features that create huge, valuable data sets of audio, image, and video data. That is something that is all eventually, if not currently, being driven towards nudging and targeted advertising revenue models. Now, I don't say that to say that targeted advertising and revenue generation is a bad thing, but it is just to say that this is something that we need to be aware of and acknowledge as the real driving force behind this push of AGI. It's also shaping policy agendas. So we need to frame things, as we've just heard, from this perspective of a general intelligence that might rival or surpass the smartest, the most brilliant, the most capable members of the human race. That immediately engenders a national securitized framing of policy solutions. That means it prioritizes certain risks like biosafety, the main focus of these US executive order, and the main focus of the vast majority, about 90% of the resources the United Kingdom's AI Safety Institute does when it comes to evaluations. It also means certain interventions that we heard about earlier, like bottlenecking compute or restrictions on data, are another kind of solution that is really trying to prevent the proliferation and use and the control over who is developing these advanced systems. It means that policy solutions might worsen dependencies on some of these major providers, but crucially, it also means market consolidation. It makes high burdens on small companies that can't meet. The cost of compliance for large companies is something they can't afford. It's creating a situation in which you're seeing further and further market consolidation in the space of companies that just can't meet the burdens that are being asked of them. The last thing I'll say is it's distracting from wider AI policy solutions aimed at well-evidenced harm. So I'm going to use the UK here, my favorite bugbear. The UK is a really frustrating place because we've had 7 years of government policy that have said the same things. We have existing regulation that works, but we need new powers for some regulators, new capacities, and new resources to actually allow them to enforce the law. That is a known reality of UK politics. And every single time we get so close to publishing a bill, it gets pushed aside for something else. In this case, it's being pushed aside for a frontier model bill that will create a similar standard as the California bill did of a critical risk threshold for developers, solving a problem that no one is asked to solve and pushing aside problems that frankly desperately need to be resolved if we're serious about tackling some of the core issues of AI systems that are harming us today. There's also many AGIs. I highly recommend, by the way, this wonderful, wonderful blog post from Eric Savaggio from Tech Policy Press called Challenging the Myths of Generative AI. I think this is something that's really critical for us to understand if we're being honest about how the definitions of AGI, this idea of a general intelligence, is driving certain myths that increase adoption and our misuse of these tools. One is this idea of the productivity myth that suggests that anything we spend time on is up for automation. The example Eric gives is, I don't know if you've seen this Google ad of a father who doesn't quite know how to communicate with his young daughter, so he asked Google Gemini to draft responses to her that are meant to make emotional connection. Now, you might view that as something of like, wow, what an enabling function. Another way of viewing that is we're suddenly relying on technology because we're so deficient in our ability to empathize with fellow humans. Imagine that poor daughter's response when they learned that this really heartfelt thing was generated by a system, not by their actual fathers reflecting his feelings and emotions. It really is this question of where are we encouraging automation that may be societally harmful? There's also a learning myth, which Milton touched on, this idea that we conflate the metaphor of learning as humans do and the process of training an ML system to learn. This downplays, crucially, the role that data plays in these systems, perpetuating a myth, that data is abundant, cheap, and labor-free. There's a scaling myth that many problems in AI will be fixed if we just provide more data or better training. But that means, unfortunately, that we encourage policies that enable greater collection of data, removing copyright restrictions, removing any kinds of restrictions on the collection of personal data, and increasing surveillance architecture with the intention of improving better products. And lastly, the emergence myth, this idea that as AGI scales and capabilities emerge, that you are made have to rely on policy solutions that encourage extreme forms of surveillance and could risk harming competition. I'm going to end there, but just to say, this is kind of my rant about AGI. I did promise I'd end with one positive thing I'd say about this community. Now, I am actually of the view that I think effective altruism as a community, this doomer group that we were talking about, actually is something to be assessed and evaluated as something as achieving really incredible policy success. The number of times I've gone into meetings with policymakers and they have wondered why there's not a sort of similar young person, very driven, very passionate movement from the human rights community, from the community that's doing critical AI studies. And have asked me what's going on there. I can't answer that. I gotta say, Effective Altruism does an incredible job at coordinating an effective policy response and starting a policy conversation from which we can hopefully build from, even if we think it's going in the wrong direction. So I gotta stress, as much as I'm frustrated by the framing of AGI, I can't say it's all bad. In a way, we have policymakers finally talking about an issue that, for those who've worked in the critical tech space, we've been banging on about for almost 20 years. And it's at least given us a language with which to play in around safety that we might otherwise not have existed. Okay, that's my spiel.
Well, I have some questions for Andrew. When we talk about AGI in the legitimate sense, are we still talking about a machine or a life form? I really want to know.
It's really hard to answer because I think it depends on who you talk to. I think that the way that the corporate definition of what they're coming up with is it's a advanced tool. And I think that they're leaning into that increasingly because they're aware suddenly that policymakers are paying attention. And actually this national securitization framing is really harmful for their business. They don't want to have that kind of focus on them. I think that's why you've seen Sam Altman go from saying about 5 years ago, or even 2 years ago, this is something that will kill all of humanity, and walking back those statements. That's why he's hired a policy team of folks who are much more experienced in communication around technology. So I think it depends on who you talk to. In the research community, you certainly have folks who believe they're building some kind of alien intelligence, some kind of thing that's unknowable. They're driven, I think, by a kind of desire to create something that is cool and challenging. But for most people who I at least work with in the industry, it really is just about trying to build an advanced tool. And the incentives, I think, are more around this kind of task completion objective rather than
So the other question I have is, I skipped my slides. I talked about how the AGI dialogue distracted us from policy issues. Unfortunately, that theme, and I wondered, but I couldn't tell from your presentation whether you thought this distraction function was deliberate or not. It's just a bad, in my view, it was a bad side effect. Like there's all these people were scared about the capabilities of an AGI, and they were definitely distracting us from real policy problems, like you pointed out in the UK, but they didn't know that, or they weren't trying to do that. They just really were scared. But you made it almost sound like they know what they're doing.
I think for folks who are in kind of the effective altruism community, it's not their intention to distract. And I think that's one of the things oftentimes as communities of practice with our own fora, between effective altruism meetups or kind of the FACT conference, we often talk past each other on this. Actually, what we all want is the same thing. We want safe AI systems, we want systems that work. What was alarming to me was to see how quickly you had major leaders in the tech industry pile into the narrative and what their objectives are with this. And I slightly worry that it's a different view. I think that their view is that we can engender kind of enough hype about this technology that gets us kind of in the door with a wider set of potential stakeholders to sell this into that. And I think creates in place a kind of governance and policy regime that really only the most well-resourced companies can comply with. It is pulling up the ladder behind them. I really do believe that is, if not, the main kind of goal behind their policy playbook. It's at least a secondary goal they have. They kind of see this as a cost to business, and I think they've been very effective at doing that. It's no surprise that all of the voluntary commitments and the soon-to-be regulatory requirements being put in place are literally repeating Anthropic and OpenAI's existing policies, much to the chagrin of Meta. Meta is very upset by this. Meta does not want to do this. Meta does not want these policies to be in place. They want to release open source products that compete, provide a free alternative to the massive compute investment and CapEx investment that private companies. But it is notable they have really captured the kind of discourse around responsible scaling policies or around what kinds of safeguard mechanisms should be implemented.
Yeah, that's a very effective answer and kind of what I had feared. That, yeah, it is interesting how the Bill Gates and so many of these high-level techies, entrepreneurs, Elon Musk, were part of this doomer movement. What's your theory about it?
Few thoughts. So first, from the AI ethics lens of looking at things, one of the things that they repeat is like there's not enough like attention that is for our subject because they took over the conversation in a way that like sucked all the oxygen just for their long-term thing without the short-term current issues. So yes, we need to deal maybe with both, but they took all the attention to their cause. So that's like the claim here, which I think complemented what you said. So they didn't like capture the like hijack section. And that's one thought that comes from the ethics part of things. And so there's the regulatory capture that you mentioned of the incumbents staying strong because we can comply with those really strict things. It's also, I think, an issue that needs to be there. And we saw everything manifested in the SB 1047 debate. It has all the issues in there, right? It was like a really good case study because Meta was, and people like Andrew Yang was fighting it, saying, if we like limit and put all the liability on developers, they won't go into the open source market and try to release because they cannot protect themselves like the big ones. And then you stifle innovation, and then you have actually a less safe ecosystem. Like you have less eyes of developers and hackers and defenders on this technology. So we saw everything encapsulated like in that specific bill that I mentioned was vetoed. So maybe that will be like an example of how not to do a safety bill. Maybe you should consult with other actors, the entrepreneurs, the ethics, and then create a coalition of something that makes more sense.
Okay. Nirit, I really liked your Tolkien-esque kind of map of the world, with groups worried about AGI. And to what extent in the real world globe, but where is the discussion taking place? Is it mainly the US and the UK? Because what I fear is that this bubble of discourse is actually going to reduce the uptake of AI, sensible AI, non-problematic AI in other countries, because there's this sort of hysterical discourse taking place, perhaps in just a couple of places. Wonder about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there are a few like epic centers of doom. One is Berkeley and California in general. One is Oxford, of course, where all the main philosophers of the movement gave their, philosophy thought experiments, like the paperclips and everything that people quote. And there's the online forums that are global and by nature international, the EA forum, the Less Wrong forum, and alike, that really everybody read them if they were interested in doing AI, like a decade ago. Okay, so it was like from that like discourse of listening to thinkers like Eliezer Yudkowsky and everything, people felt OpenAI. So Sam Altman and Ilya Sutskever and everybody like, yeah, we read those stuff. We were part of the community that debated those things, that gave us ideas about AGI, and then we decided we wanted to have it like beneficial for humanity, right? Like the slogan. And it's literally everywhere. So if I like track the post-AI movement, it was founded in the Netherlands, and they have protests, small ones, they look ridiculous, but all over the world. So they have like really in every single country, you have a small group of post-AI activists, still small, but I think it like if you have the ideological fathers in, as you said, UK, US, California, or MIT in Boston, the influence is all over the world.
All right. You rely on me to do that.
No, but we had an audience question.
So I had a question about data stewardship. So if AGI depends on the data that's being fed to it, and right now, if we look at the expansion, I mean, Andrew's slide, it's market expansions going into pharmaceuticals, going into renewable. Those data, it's coming from organizations, like the Protein Data Bank, for example, those are nonprofit organizations that rely on government funding to support them. So every 5 or so years, they're up for renewal and have to get government contract to support. And these are open source databases that companies, academic researchers can rely on. In a world where NSF, for some reason, cannot support PDB, and I talked to the director of PDB and they said, well, then we're up for acquirement if anybody wants to buy us out. What happens in that world? Who would be in charge of that data, and should it be okay for companies to acquire those large amounts of data?
That's a great question. I think there's a couple parts to it that I'm trying to pick up in my head. One is, I think, a question of what happens when you have public source, open source data that is being sold to a private, or could be privatized. I think that's obviously like a very undesirable outcome. I think ideally you don't want to have a single platform or a company kind of having a monopoly on a certain kind of data asset. We are seeing that, to use a slightly different example, in the news publisher space. So one of the things that the project we're doing right now is talking with news publishers who are signing these training data deals with OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, et cetera, about what are they experiencing when they're trying to negotiate, and how are they entering into this conversation. And it is kind of like the worst case scenario from what you're thinking of. So one is they're signing exclusive contracts. So essentially Google's offering them 50 million for a one-time payment for their training data, and then also for access to pull on that data for inferences to and inference time to kind of share, topical news stories about a particular prompt. And that creates kind of a situation where only the most well-resourced companies can kind of provide that data. So it's kind of moving towards a more increasingly privatized area. There's some other interesting initiatives that are kind of touching on this as well, about like, I don't know if anyone remembers this, OpenAI did this very sneaky thing of saying, it'd be so great if anyone could just donate their data to us to improve our products for free. It'll be beneficial to all, don't worry. It's kind of a public good. And this really is kind of leaning into this idea that they straddle the line between presenting themselves as a public good company and then also selling a commercial product. And I think you have to keep in mind is that even if right now you can use ChatGPT free, there's no reason why that will continue in the future. Once they have kind of a data monopoly or a data asset advantage, they will start to extract further and further rents. And that's something we've seen in advertising markets, and we've seen in other technologies like this. It's something where the more you move to a model of data becoming more privatized, it just kind of incentivizes that dynamic. The last thing I'll say is that the kind of data you're talking about, it's kind of scientific data, is like the gold mine for these companies. They really want really high value, rare data types that might not be open access, but that if they can get access to it, it provides a huge advantage to them. So Elsevier, for example, the publishing company, they are like the hot item right now of trying to negotiate these deals, because if you can get access to the entire canon of academic literature that they have described, you can start to create much more advanced, in theory, these kind of more advanced AlphaFold type models that are advancing scientific development. So, but the question again, like, what happens if that's run by one private company? That seems quite dangerous for the future of science, for the future of. I hope I answered your question, but it just strikes me as a real truth.
There's a quick to that. If people want to go study, look at what's going on with 23andMe.
Yeah,
they use that same rhetoric of we're here for the good. Come and Silicon Valley types drink that right down, and all these people have donated, and they've had a couple hits where money changes in their business model. Also recklessness. Remember, somehow we're disruptive, so we don't have to obey the FDA. Wrong. And now they're again in a cycle of a lot of really valuable data, and no one's sure where it's going to go. So just for people who are maybe PhD stuff, you could probably use that to help track, I think, what some of Nirit's work's doing, showing how these rhetorics pop up and continue the way Andrew described it.
But don't we also see content suppliers signing multiple deals with different AI model platforms? So it works both ways, right?
Yeah.
The incentive for some data suppliers is to get the data out to as many licenses that they can.
This is actually why we're hosting this workshop, is we're trying to with these different publishers, because we want to understand why some are signing exclusive deals for training data, why some are sort of saying we'll sign, with many companies we can. Some are even going so far as say we'll sign deals for OpenAI and Google, but we'll open source it to smaller providers. But there's no consistency. So it just seems like a bit of a strange market at the moment for some of these data deals. No one's really talking to each other to explain why they're doing certain things.
Yeah, so I was hoping that you guys could maybe help me with a little bit of a thought exercise, a comparison of sorts. So I'm thinking of the other space that many of us in this room have been involved in, which is the internet governance space, which had there's these spurts of funding in my experience, and those in the room can correct me, but I think there's funding when there's a perceived threat that there's gonna be like the internet is going to be taken over by the UN, or the internet is going to be something dramatic is going to happen in the sort of governance of networks. Then there's this huge influx of funding and companies and people who engage. And then there are moments where there are lows, and I think right now you could argue potentially that there's a low where it's hard to get funding for standards work. It's hard to get people to show up and participate. It's hard to get it's hard to find venues or funding for conferences that are like the Internet Governance Forum, which is sort of a human rights or sort of content-oriented forum that was a negotiation outcome of the WISIS. And I guess my question for you guys is, it's kind of goes on the last point that you raised and some of the work that you were thinking about in your mapping. How has the EA community done such a nice job of pulling in all this funding? Do you think it's going to kind of shut down at one point? And how would you compare it to sort of the internet governance space where we have seen these ebbs and flows? I mean, do you think once we start getting into the conversations of standards, people will be like, that's boring and we're not going to fund it as much? Because standards they take a long time to develop, a lot of process. It can be kind of boring. And I guess I wonder where you think this is going, if you can compare the two spaces, if you have any suggestions on that. Because I think, by the way, in internet governance, there are a lot of, at one point in time, and certainly there's a continued effort to get a lot of younger people or new fresh faces involved. And some of that works, some of it doesn't. But I think there's, it just hasn't, it's a space that has been around for a long time, but it has ebbs and flows of funding.
Well, we're definitely in a ebb, right? There's a stampede of governance agencies at the international and local and even state level saying, we want to do something in this space. Was your metaphor the motorcycle driver who doesn't know where he's going, but he wants to get there first? The UN is particularly interesting because, again, they have no authority, so they're going to lead governance, but what does that mean for them?
It's also like, isn't it the fastest they've ever put together a report is on the AI report they just put out? Like, it's the fastest the UN has done anything.
I don't know, but in terms of the EA community, I would defer to Nirit. What do you think about that? Is this like a flash in the pan? It's going to go away?
It's like more than a decade in the building and in the making. So I'm looking at all their spreadsheets of their grants and fellowship and where the funding is going, a lot of like follow the money investigative journalism work. And they have like this whole section, they have like mitigating the risk of advanced AI, catastrophic risk mitigation, and they have this huge pipeline of, they call it movement building, talent recruiting. They have many names for like, this is the talent pipeline. They pour so many hundreds of millions on just recruiting the next, so they start from high school and then first years of college and all the EA group that you have answered off in, elite universities and others. And they're building like the next generation already of people who will just be obsessed with doing something. But their drive to do something, even if it goes to the boring like practicality, the ideology of we have to do it to save the world is there day one, because that's the mission, right? So you're gonna have them for a long, long time everywhere because they invested in it early and still ongoing funds just specifically to that direction.
So maybe what you're saying is the capacity building effort is different than in internet governance. Maybe we didn't do enough capacity building.
Not like they.
Not like this. Okay.
We just had a couple like quick points here, like what, so I stress, we hire EAs, we have folks in our organization. I think one of the things that you know, my view is it's an epistemic community. So you have all kinds of different views, folks who are like on the AGI side, folks who go much further to actually more like a sort of socio-technical critical AI side, but they kind of come from that community. What's notable to me is actually there's quite a lot this community agrees on, agree on when it comes to policy solutions, with a couple major exceptions around like over surveillance and extreme forms of regulation in some communities. But there are some aspects about this epistemic community that I think is worth acknowledging. So for anyone who's read Shazada Ahmed's amazing paper on the epistemic community behind AI safety, I highly recommend reading it. One of the things that is notable is it's very self-referential. So it's kind of a community that has you know, its own forums like Less Wrong, its own sort of meetups that are kind of oftentimes citing their own material when it comes to political events. And part of what the funding aspects or funding wings of these communities are doing is they're actually being very self-aware of the fact that they are very self-referential and are only funding to each of the groups, and that's losing them credibility. So our organization has seen quite a few, it's very strange, in the last like 3 months, we've had like several technical altruist-based community funders reach out to us saying, could we fund your organization? Could we other organizations like you that we could fund? We funded the FACTS conference this year for those who went, which was, you know, very controversial for folks who were there. But I think part of that is the genuine intention. If you're kind of, you know, being more generous, it's an intention to try to sort of expand their community and sort of their understanding of the problems. A more I guess, cynical view of that is that it's a sort of attempt to buy legitimacy and sort of tie their mast to scholars who are kind of coming from that own community. I'm kind of more on the sort of, you know, less critical side of that, but I understand why you know, there's reasons to be skeptical.
Oh, Laura, and then Andres.
I have a quick question, maybe for each of you to answer, you know, quickly if you want to. If, let's say that effective altruism never existed, like that's not a thing. And let's say that no one ever coined the term AGI. And let's say those doomers never talked to the boomers who invented the internet. Like that, like none of that existed. There's still, you know, moving from the discourses into the techno-realism, the policy realism. I was just wondering if each of you from your areas of expertise could say, well, what is the thing that does concern you about some aspect of artificial intelligence, whether it's generative AI, whether it's intellectual property rights, or, you know, like what are the things that people should know about? Like what is the public interest intersection with some component of AI that we should worry about?
I have a quick answer.
Yeah.
So he's not here because he left, but Dean Paul had a great piece in Time magazine just yesterday, 2 days ago, with the guy who was at OpenAI and left and was a whistleblower about the NDA. So they were like not agreeing on anything to do with the AI trajectory, but the one thing that they all agreed, and this is why they created the op-ed at Time magazine, was we need more transparency. So they said like the AI safety bill went down, but the one thing that everybody tried when it happened, it had like very specific whistleblower protections, requirements of transparency reports from people who were building the frontier models. And that, like, I think it's something that we can all agree that we need. So if there's one thing that needs to be pushed regardless of doomerism, it's like the transparency reports from the labs that just inform what you're doing more and doing more in the open. So then we know about the risk and the things we need to tackle.
I would say my only real concern about AI is, as I said earlier, bad implementations that lead to really stupid rigid forms of organizational behavior. So for those of you who are at Georgia Tech, think of Workday. You know, just some kind of enterprise level or even governmental level implementations that just are based on assumptions about what should happen or what is happening that are going to prove to be rigid, and then because they are kind of an infrastructure, they will be hard to change, right? And you know, public policy is not going to be a solution to most of those, right? Certainly not regulating the technology or setting compute thresholds or deciding what's an acceptable model or not. It's going to be like, this organization is supposed to be doing this. And because of AI, it's doing that. We have to regulate his organization, or we have to penalize his organization, or we have to get it to rip out this AI system because it's doing bad things. That's my only concern.
Yeah, I've very similar to Milton. I think kind of being my other answer, I think the thing I really worry about deeply, and I see every day, is the rush to deploy faulty AI systems that don't work in high stakes settings, seeking to replace human laborers, and critically in services where that human role is so essential. So public sector services, health, education, that is the driving factor of AI adoption that we see. I think particularly for things like risk prediction systems where this literally just doesn't work and the science is not there and the stakes of getting it wrong are so high compared to the status quo of not using the tool. It just is shocking to me that, we kind of continue to mass adopt this. And I really want to stress that is something that many EA folks that we talk to also are concerned with. It's not just AGI, but I think it's just a lot easier to think about the thing that might kill all of humanity than to think about the thing that might discriminate against members of society that you maybe don't interact very much with. That's my kind of worry about the community, is it tends to be a very educated, mostly male and white community. And so they oftentimes don't think about kind of inequality factors that arise with use of these systems and these things.
Okay, Andreas, we're gonna close this session with your comments or questions. Or do you have some online people that want to bring in?
I don't believe anybody.
Okay, all right. Okay. So my question is, and so thank you very much for both of you, for everyone on the panel to kind of like outline AGI and where it comes from and give us a little bit of geography, if you want, of this terminology. But one question I was having or trying to understand, so is this conversation mostly in the, say, consumer space, corporate space, productization? Or do you also see like, I mean, AI is happening in other places like, Department of Energy efforts, national labs, or the entire scientific community that uses AI to advance, science, weather prediction. How does that play in that community? Is that a concern, or do they just use AI as a tool? Are there similar concerns, or is the AGI myth conversation that is mostly related to productization of AI, sold to other companies and people like us who want to use it, but not a concern among scientists who use that?
I think it's absolutely a different language. You're talking about products versus research. So in products, that's why you hear the words generative AI, and now increasingly you're hearing the word agentic AI. Meta, when they're rolling, the stated objective of Meta is to create a digital assistant that mediates all of your digital and physical interactions. And that is like what they're investing all their research investment in. But when they talk about it, they're not talking about AGI. They use the word digital assistant, which evokes this idea, this metaphor of something that serves your interest, that gives you the illusion of control. One of the things that, again, is I think another myth is this idea that you are in control. In reality, if you think about generative AI systems, you're not in control of your prompts. There's shadow prompting going on. Every time you put a prompt in ChatGPT, it is informing your prompts to what it thinks you actually want to get. And it is reshaping the output to what it thinks you want to get to. And that is a choice architecture control system that is actively working right now. It could very easily be used to sort of nudge and shape and encourage certain advertising behavior. So no, AGI is a term primarily used, I think, in some policy communities and in some research communities, but for products, it's too scary of a term. People rather want something that evokes something that's working in their interest.